Good afternoon and welcome to this Sponge Hangout looking at the direction of workplace learning in 2017. I'm Julie Wedgwood and I'm going to be your host for this 30-minute live discussion. If you wish to join in, if you are following along on Twitter, then the hashtag is Sponge Hangout. But if you've logged into YouTube, you must be logged in if you want to be able to comment in the comment stream to the right of what you can see on your screen. Anyway, for the next 30 minutes, we're going to be hearing from an expert panel for what to look out for in 2017. Let me first introduce them. Our first expert is Don Taylor, a very well known in the L&D community and probably one of the most connected people in L&D that I know worldwide. Don wears an awful lot of hats. He's chairman of the Learning and Skills Group. He's chairman of the Learning and Performance Institute, and he also chairs the Learning Technologies Conference, which I'm sure many of you will know will be taking place in just a few weeks' time in London. Welcome, Don.
Thank you.
Second on our panel is Laura Overton, Managing Director of Towards Maturity, an independent research organisation that helps people in the L&D space and organisations to really make the most of the impact of learning technology at work. I'm sure that in part of our conversation, Laura will be drawing on her most recent benchmark report that's become a trusted source of data for those of us that are operating in L&D today. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
Finally, our third panellist is Kate Nichols, Head of Learning Innovation at Sponge UK and the most recent recipient of the Gold Award of Designer of the Year at the Learning Technologies Awards. Kate is very much at the sharp end of delivering leading-edge learning technology solutions in global organisations. Welcome, Kate. I'd like to start with my first question to the panel, and I'd like to come to you first, Don. So that gives Kate and Laura a little bit of thinking time. Don, I'd really like you to start by picking one thing that you believe or would like to see gain traction in learning and development during 2017. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Julie. First, I must say it's great to be introduced as, you know, we have other people on this call. So Laura's introduced as someone who's done great research, and of course Kate's a gold medal winner, and I am a really connected guy. That's the pinnacle of my achievement so far, but it's okay. And actually, I think that's important, and perhaps we'll come on to that later in the course of this conversation. What do I think is going to be big this year? Well, I'm just wrapping up the Global Sentiment Survey. I know a lot of people are still talking about micro-learning. So both what I'd like to be big this year and what I hope would be big this year is micro-learning. I know it's going to be big. I hope it will be big in the sense that it's correctly understood and applied, which is to say small bits of content applied in a structured way that enable people to learn over a period of time through well-spaced out learning. Nothing new there. It's just that the technology now makes it possible. Donald Clark's very good at pinning down where people are talking a lot of rubbish on this stuff. He doesn't actually point out where necessarily people are doing a good job, but there are people doing good work out there. And I hope we can ignore the nonsense and focus on where it's being done really well and say, yes, micro-learning is working and does a great job when it's done well. That's
brilliant. Thank you. So we need to focus on micro-learning and see if that is really going to gain traction.
We don't need to. It's going to be very big, and it will continue to. What we need to do is focus on what the real micro-learning is, and it's not just bits of content chopped up into ever smaller bits. That's just death by a thousand cuts, and that's nonsense.
Thank you, Don. That was very clear. Laura, what's your view?
Well, if we kind of if you Google learning trends at the moment, you know, so many different organizations saying, you know, the sentiment survey done, you know, micro-learning, videos up there. People are talking about, you know, all kinds of the new technologies, the wearables, the AI and all of those kinds of things. But I think part of your question, Julie, was about what would I hope should be trending?
Yeah.
What do I hope be trending? And actually, it kind of picks up on what Don was talking about and how do we use these things well. And what I would like to see is that actually what I'd like to see trending is a focus on results, because what we have been doing is kind of tracking all the tools and what people think's hot, what they're talking about, versus what they're actually achieving. And I just did a little bit of a kind of a cross-check, and I've found that despite this year, what's trending is our ambition is going sky high. We want to achieve everything with all of these new tools, absolutely everything. But when I compare with what people are achieving today and reporting that actually I've got an ambition, but I'm getting it, compared with 5 years ago, I am seeing an incredibly disappointing trend. So with the exception of we want to improve compliance, I'll say no more, which has gone up. People have been more successful improving compliance. Things like, you know, we want to improve productivity, we want to become faster, which is a perfect application of the micro-learning.
Yeah.
We want to be able to adapt quickly to change. We want to be able to reduce time to competency. The percentage of organizations achieving that has either flatlined compared with it was last year, 5 years ago, or it's actually gone down. So what I'm really disappointed at seeing at the moment is that actual trend is our desire versus our achievement of some of these results is going down year by year. So my hope is that this is the year it's going to be reversed, because some of the things that these tools, which are trending in our discussion, can deliver are phenomenal, and the business will be really interested in it. It's just that we're just not achieving that at the moment. So that's my hope. I'm going for a hope.
Thank you. So, thank you. That was actually some fascinating content there to kind of mull over afterwards. Maybe we'll come back to some of that, Laura. Kate, what about you? You know, I would imagine that obviously in the role that you have with innovations, you must have maybe some insight you can give us about new technologies or a different application of technology we might see during this year.
Yeah, definitely. So as you know, I kind of work at the implementation level of delivering learning designs and learning strategies. And it's interesting from my perspective because it's very nice to go last, actually, because I can agree with Don and Laura, but then I can also add a little bit about what I see from the day to day. And I think I'm still seeing some quite poorly produced learning that just will not go away. And I hope that this year will be the year that people take a risk and try something new. I think into Laura's sort of idea about this ambition, it feels to me like maybe now's the time where we can try new things. And one of the areas I've been working on just in particular is around the whole kind of VR and Interactive 360 and kind of perhaps finding a way of taking that kind of technology and making it accessible to audiences who just want to start having a play in that kind of space. And so I'm really excited about the sorts of things that are going to let people safely play with quite new and emerging technologies and start seeing different results and really different reactions from learners that just kind of reignite a bit of love for the digital learning again. So I guess I'm kind of passionate about that.
Thank you. That's really interesting. What I'd like to do then, based on the responses I've had from you all, is I'd like to come to Laura for this next question, because I think it really plays into a lot of what you three of you have been discussing. So Laura, if we're talking about change in the workplace and change that we want to really manifest, do you think that this really is going to be a turning point year based on the fact that there is so much change on the horizon for us as a nation and also as a world?
I believe we've got more opportunity to actually realize that ambition this year, because so much of the status quo has been disrupted. And I think that learning professionals today have got two choices that they will be faced with. Do we take advantage of the fact that the organization, the individuals that we're working with are in a disrupted mode, and therefore they can maybe embrace some of the new vision that we've been holding for a long while? Do we take advantage of that to try something new? You know, as Kate was talking about there, you know, to be able to say, look, okay, the world's changed, now is our time. Or do they actually look at the circumstances and become fearful? And when we become fearful, one of the challenges is that we then become almost like a bunny in a headlight. We get all of this new things we could do, but just stay and actually perhaps even revert to the very safe, the very familiar hidey hole of the classroom, of the e-learning course, of what we used to do that used to work for us in the old world of business. It's a fantastic opportunity that we've got, and I think the brave will take it.
Well, talking of the brave, Kate, you've been very brave in the way that you've been championing for change in the workplace and actually making that happen. So what's your view?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that makes projects successful is having somebody on the client side that's willing to take a risk. That's the real critical ingredient. If people, we have the ability to create anything technology-wise, design-wise, there aren't really any limitations. And so I think it does, a lot of it comes down to having courage. I think also something that can happen is you can have one small kind of champion project within an organization that can work really well, and then that kind of creates a ripple out to other departments in the company and sort of sets a precedent. And I've certainly seen that happen on projects we've worked on, where we've created things that people have thought, oh, that's actually how we now want to do things, and we want to kind of follow in that direction rather than in the kind of brand police direction that we so often see kind of crushing out some of these creative things. And from my point of view, I've already got lots of kind of projects on the horizon that I'm looking to try with people to try and help make it a safe place for them to be courageous and do these new more disruptive things.
Well, I guess we'll look forward to hearing what you get up to over this next 12 months then. Don, obviously you have a unique perspective because you see both what's going on here in the UK, in Europe, and obviously with all of the travels that you do, your global perspective as well. So does what Kate and Laura resonate with you, or are we missing something?
Totally resonates. I would put two caveats on. I'd say firstly, the appetite in the L&D community is for the new, but it's not always for the new and difficult. So Laura and I have conversations on the results of her benchmark, where we look at the gap between the aspiration and the reality, and unfortunately, the gap, as Laura says quite rightly, seems to be growing. Much minor research, my survey, I've noticed, firstly, developing the L&D function. I asked people about that 2 years ago, and it was ranked 7th. It's since dropped. I think this year it's going to come at number 13. In other words, developing the L&D function is something that's hot or interesting anymore. But all the whizzy stuff, virtual reality and so on, is right up the list. Rather do the stuff that is sexy and new than the stuff that is really difficult for which else. So that's one thing. I think there's a fundamental turning of our heads of the hard work that needs to be done to be brave and make the changes that we're talking about here. In addition, Kate was quite rightly, sometimes people are bravest when they're absolutely forced into those circumstances and they have no other choice. I'm thinking about Andrew Jacobs when he was at Lewisham, had his budget cut by 80%. Transformed the learning and development department by having no choice other than to do things completely differently. Now, I'm not suggesting bosses and say, you know what, I want to innovate, cut my budget by 80%, because you might find that you're. On the other hand, you look at things as dramatically as Andrew does, but without, suddenly you'll find you can do different things. And I believe that that's going to happen. They're going to be put in difficult circumstances. So take the jump yourself mentally and consider, what if I was in a really difficult position, how would I transform things? Yourself a burning platform before somebody else gives it to you.
Thank you. That's really interesting, and I think there's some very valid advice there. And I mean, I've personally had that experience of what do you do when you have no budget. And it's amazing what you can do when you find yourself in that challenging situation. And sometimes out of having no budget, the creativity to find solutions is what emerges. So it'll be interesting to see what happens this year as we face such uncertainty as a country. I want to pick up on something that you said, though. You referred to virtual reality. And Kate, if I could just come to you and could we just talk about that? We've had a question in from Twitter from Nick Beddoes, and thank you, Nick, for your question. He says, apart from the obvious technical issues with headsets, what do you see as the main barriers to using virtual reality in learning, and how do we overcome them? And I think that actually, having read Nick's question when I saw it come in, I thought that's actually a really valid point, because I think, as you know, I'm a little skeptical, because I'm not quite sure how I would use it. So can you give us an insight?
Yeah, sure. I would love to. My journey with virtual reality kind of began probably at the beginning of 2016. So I've kind of gone through that curve myself around nobody will use it, it's too expensive, organizations aren't ready for it, really full circle to the point where now I've overcome my own challenges and thought, actually, it's not that expensive. There are ways of getting around it. We can certainly create environments which make it easier and safer for people to participate. So I think linked to the question there is something around, I think there was something in the question there, Julie, that said about there's a technical barrier with the headsets. I imagine perhaps what is being referred to there is the variety of headsets that there are. So you've got your tethered headsets, which need very powerful computers and graphics cards to be able to run them, and very expensive technology. Clearly, there's going to be a limitation around that just from a kind of cost point of view and a reach point of view, which is going to hamper our ability to get things out there. But on the flip side, there are Google Cardboard-based solutions, which can clearly, up for under £20, you can have stuff on your phone. Most phones will work Android and iOS. And that, for me, is starting to become quite a viable option. When it comes to the actual implementation of it, it's really funny because I was at DevLearn and I did a VR experience where I was skiing, and it was so terrifying that I nearly fell over. So I totally get the whole thing of that it can be very unsafe and people can get very unsteady. And, we've seen things on YouTube where people fall over. It really is like that, can make you queasy. So I think a great thing that I saw in New York was this kind of the pop-up or the arcade concept, where you locate a kind of implementation of, say, 5-6 headsets, sofas, and people who can help. And there's a program of things that you can actually watch and participate in. And there are enough people around to help support that person, put their headset on correctly, get their eyes adjusted and climatized. And I think that is something that might be an interesting way of looking at how we start to kind of facilitate these sorts of experiences within organizations, and also, let's face it, market it, normalize this tech and see where it can take us.
That sounds really sensible. I mean, Laura, from the benchmark, what was coming out of the benchmark with regards to adopting much more challenging forms of learning technology, but also this sense of immersion, this sense of augmented reality that is so successful in other markets, particularly in gaming? Have you seen anything emerging out of the benchmark relating to that?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting because it's interesting to hear that in terms of what people are interested in and as hot off their sentiment through Donald's work that he's doing, VR is pretty high up there. When we ask, what tools are you using right now to actually deliver against your objectives, only 8% of 600 L&D leaders from around the globe are even experimenting with virtual reality. So what we aspire to do versus what we actually do is something that's quite different. And if you're talking about the barriers, I think one of the barriers, and again, Donald just alluded to a moment ago, is that, if we have our eye on the shiny new thing and don't think about the skills that we need, not necessarily to design that, because we leave that to the experts, but to know when and where this might work, what problem is it solving within the organization, we need to be equipped as a learning and development function to be able to know what to do with these things. I think that is a barrier, and the fact that kind of like that being hungry to change our own skills is so low on the kind of sentiment survey is something that's a concern, because I think that is going to be a big barrier, because we don't know what to do with it. We're not going to be leveraging the opportunity. We're not even going to know how to start a conversation with someone like Kate. So I think that's the number one barrier. Look at, who is using it around the globe. It's not as used in the UK, slightly more in the Middle East actually, and Asia. So twice as likely than the national average to samples we can see there coming through. But I think certain sectors are more likely to use it. So the chemical and pharmaceutical sector, we've seen that they are more likely to be moving in, and so they've got a need. Maybe it's health and safety, maybe it's some critical things where that kind of immersive experience really will transfer skills. I think really the thing that kind of struck me when I was analysing the data for this year's report, we called it unlocking potential. What are the things that are being used to unlock different benefits that we're all looking for? And where they started to hit in actually wasn't at efficiency or skills, but actually at changing culture. And we found that those that were more successful in culture change were more likely to be experimenting, not just with VR, but with wearables, with AI. So those that were having more of an influence on improving culture, thinking that learning is an accepted thing, are more likely themselves to be trialing out and learning from experimenting with some of these. Again, it comes back to boldness, I think, is a characteristic of the organisation. So it's really varied, but no one's doing a lot in earnest with this.
But that's a really interesting point, because if we're facing change this year as a nation, for all the uncertainty and disruption that we might go through, maybe that is actually going to be really good for encouraging people to actually take a proper look. And I really get the message about the fact there is a need to experiment, and there is a need to understand how to apply those new technologies, and that's really interesting, and I think something I'm certainly going to take away and think about. Thank you. Don, can I come to you and get your inside track really now on what you think the learners themselves are going to be demanding from their L&D, or if they have no L&D department, for learning from their organisation during 2017?
Yeah, in a word, control. But they're not going to demand it, they're just going to take it. Increasingly, people are going to be doing it for themselves. Classic example is MOOCs. If you talk to most L&D departments, they're not using MOOCs, but if you look at the world of MOOCs, the number of people who had taken at least one MOOC doubled in 2015 to 35 million. Just this month, The Economist ran a whole piece on learning at work. They did 2 pages entitled The Return of the MOOC, 2 pages in The Economist on the return of the MOOC, but we're not touching them. That's because people are doing it for themselves. They're not going to demand it, they're just going to take it. Learners are back in control. Let's shift how we do our work to facilitating them to get to what they need to do. That's my view.
That's really interesting, and I think that's an interesting message to take into this year's Learning Technology Show and the conference, to kind of walk the show and attend the conference and think about what they're seeing at that event from that perspective of the learner. Thank you so much for that. That was really interesting. Kate, what about you? What's your perspective for what the learners from the organisations you work for are going to be looking for in 2017?
Well, I suppose it comes back to the first point that I made in the beginning, which is just perhaps something a little bit more hopeful and interesting than what they've seen before. I mean, I absolutely agree with everything that's been said here, and I'm really I just think that there's still so much ground to be covered in terms of things that we're going to need to give to learners. Well, where there's a need to deliver learning from, say, a vendor, then that needs to be of top quality and really, really good and really interesting and engaging. Interestingly, with what Don said, I'm kind of curious as to how the whole learners demanding what they want for themselves, how that's going to play out. Because, for instance, I do MOOCs, I'm on Coursera, I'm doing courses on innovation, Sponge isn't providing that for me, I'm just doing them for myself. And so it's kind of like, well, I'm like the ultimate kind of, that really fascinates me, that I'm my own kind of experiment. So what are the kinds of courses? Where are the kinds of needs? How would an organization even compete with that? Should it? All these kinds of questions. But certainly I just think even now, still increased quality on deliverables it's just will increase people's ability to get through kinds of learning that is being delivered to them in the workplace.
Wow, so I think we need another panel discussion to go through that whole question then, don't we? Laura, what can you add? Because obviously, you know, you have got the inside track on what's really going on in organisations. So, you know, what's your perspective on what is Don right with his prediction of what learners are going to do?
Julie, Don's always right.
Of course, I know that.
No, but yeah, you're right. People are taking control. We do work directly with organisations with our learner landscape. So we've got insights from, it's coming up to 35,000 learners that we've gathered over the last 3 years about going to how do they currently learn what they do, you know, what they need to do their job. So, you know, what are they doing for themselves? And it's really clear that they are taking control. It's not just taking control in the course, the MOOCs, etc., but, you know, it's through their relationship, through their social networks, through the way that they use search engines, through the way that they get to things when they need it to help them do the role that's important to them. Now, they are saying that, you know, having more structure, having an opportunity for somebody to maybe guide them through that process is something that is important to them. So they're not dismissing the course. But I don't believe that they will go to the learning function and demand anything but the course, because we've set up our shop and we've said, this is what we will sell you. And you don't go to sort of like the local corner store if you want to get the finest bottle of wine. You know where to go, what you need at that point in time. And I think one of the challenges for us this year is how do we switch to having a shop of courses, whether they're micro ones or whether they are, you know, sort of like videos and libraries and, you know, come and get it, to actually saying, okay, well, what do our staff in our organization, how do they currently learn, and how can we get closer to them and support them where they are in ways that are unexpected? Because they won't demand it of us, because they've got no idea that we're even thinking about them, to be quite honest. They probably just think that we're there to provide courses. So I think that's the biggest challenge, because they are taking control, they're doing things for themselves. And by the way, all of our data, however we cut it, does not show that the millennials are leading the way on this. The millennials in certain areas actually need a little bit more structure, a little bit more guidance. Where is this taking me? They want to know, they want that help. Whereas the over 50s and over 60s, you know, we are learning in the way that we need to learn. We don't call it learning, we just get on and do it. And I think that's one of the things. How do we help organizations be more intentional about it? And how do we then go and help them to deliver that better?
I really love the fact that we don't call it learning. It's just I'm getting on with what I have to get on with doing, and I recognise that from the teenagers that I live with as being their approach. So that's a really useful kind of way of thinking about it. Sadly, I think we could carry on a lot further with this conversation, but we've nearly run out of time. So just to really round up and as a reminder, we have got the Learning Technologies show coming up, as I said, at the very beginning of February. And I just wondered if there was one thing that you guys, and we'll do this very quickly so we don't run out of time, very quickly, that you're looking to get or looking to find or looking to go and investigate at Learning Technologies this year. What would it be? And can we keep this really brief? Don, can I come to you first? Because you probably have a bit of an inside track because you know what will be happening.
What I aim to get from Learning Technologies, what I aim to get from every conference and event I attend, which I want to hear great practice. I want to hear what people are doing out there in the world, because, you know, we beat ourselves up sometimes, but there's some great stuff happening out there, and I love hearing it. That's what I'm there for.
Thank you. Kate, what about you?
Julia, I'm looking for things that are going to help me understand what's going to be going on in 3 to 5 years' time. So I'm really there to try and pick up on some underlying trends and thinking about really what's emerging. And I'm going to be doing a bit of predicting after I've come back.
Ooh.
Ooh, okay, that's definitely another panel interview then. And finally, Laura, I know that you and I often meet up at that conference. It's where the L&D departments and everybody in L&D tends to end up in February at that conference. What are you hoping to get out of it this year?
Well, I think for me, and also for the whole of the Tools Maturity team, we've got our focus on the practical how-tos. We want to see action. We want to identify those who've taken action. We put together our ultimate guide to the Learning Technology Show, and the whole thing is packed full of the things that we've identified as to help people take action. But for me, what I want to see are people making commitments. So, and being able to come back next year as great speakers, to say this is what we have done, and this is what we're doing.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure that if people haven't downloaded your benchmark, I hope that they do go onto your towardsmaturity.org website and download it, because for me, it's as natural it is to plan in learning technologies into my start the year program for my own development. Your benchmark report is a fundamental source of data that informs my practice. So I hope that other people, if they haven't got it yet, will certainly go and download it. It's been a fantastic discussion. I wish we had more time. I'm extremely grateful to all three of you for giving us your time to talk about this today. And I really look forward to having a chance to talk to you in more depth, perhaps if we bump into each other in the coming weeks and obviously at the show. So thank you very, very much for all of your input. It's been fantastic. Thank you.